I stood at the altar of the historic New York chapel, adjusting my silver cufflinks. The heavy scent of hundreds of fresh white roses filled the air. Everything was perfect. For 3 years, I had built a simple, quiet life with Chloe Miller. She knew me only as Leo Harrison, a hard-working, average financial analyst. She had no idea about my true identity or the massive, multi-billion-dollar empire I privately controlled. I had kept a secret because I wanted someone to love me for who I was, not for my bank account. Today, I thought I was finally getting that. The organ music swelled. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the church opened, and Chloe appeared. She looked absolutely stunning in her long, white lace gown. As she began her walk down the aisle, she smiled at me. My heart raced. I smiled back, believing that every sacrifice I had made to live a quiet life was worth it. She reached the altar, stepping onto the small raised platform. I reached out, gently taking her trembling hands in mine. "You look beautiful, Chloe," I whispered, my voice thick with genuine emotion. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered back, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just really nervous." "Don't be," I said softly, squeezing her fingers. "It's just you and me." Before she could reply, a loud, violent crash echoed through the chapel. The heavy wooden doors slammed open so hard they bounced against the stone walls. The beautiful organ music died instantly. A cold draft swept into the warm church, carrying the scent of rain. I turned my head. Standing in the doorway was a tall man in a flawlessly tailored navy blue suit. He had his hands shoved into his pockets, and a cruel, arrogant smirk sat on his face. It was Julian Vance, Chloe's toxic, billionaire ex-boyfriend. "Julian?" Chloe gasped. Her voice was incredibly small, but in the dead silence of the church, it carried to every corner. Her hands pulled away from mine. I felt the sudden chill of her empty palms. Julian walked down the carpeted aisle with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't look at the shocked guests. His eyes were locked entirely on Chloe. "Did you really think I'd let you go through with this, Chloe?" Julian called out, his loud voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "You're really going to marry this total nobody? You're going to settle for cheap copper when you've already tasted pure gold?" "Julian, please leave," my sister, Sarah, yelled from the front pew, her face turning bright red with anger. "You have absolutely no right to be here." Julian ignored her, stopping just feet from the altar. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with pure mock pity. "Look at him, Chloe. You probably had to save up for 6 months just to rent that tuxedo. Is this really the life you want? A tiny apartment, coupon cutting, and a boring, average husband?" "Julian," Chloe whispered. I looked at Chloe, waiting for her to speak. I waited for her to tell him to get out. I waited for her to tell him that she loved me, that we had built a real life together. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Look at me. Tell him to leave, and we can finish this." She didn't look at me. She didn't look at her parents, who were staring at her in horror. Her eyes were glued to Julian's expensive suit, to his confident posture, to the promise of limitless wealth he represented. Slowly, Chloe took a step backward, away from me. "Chloe," I asked, the first crack of real panic showing in my chest. "What are you doing?" The beautiful bouquet of white roses she was holding slipped through her fingers. It hit the polished stone floor with a soft, devastating thud, the petals scattering everywhere. "I'm sorry, Leo," Chloe said, her voice shaking but suddenly cold. She took another step back, closer to Julian. "I try to live a simple life with you, but I belong in Julian's world." "You're leaving?" I asked, my voice barely whisper. "On our wedding day?" "For him." "Look at the reality, Leo," Chloe said, tears finally spilling over her cheeks, though her expression was hardened by ambition. "Julian is my soulmate. I thought I could move on with someone normal like you. But seeing him here, I realize I can't live a boring, average life. I need more than what you can give me." Julian laughed, a loud, grating sound. He stepped forward, wrapping his arm tightly around Chloe's waist. He pulled her against him, looking at me like I was a piece of dirt on his shoe. "Thanks for keeping her warm for me, loser," Julian sneered. Now go find someone who actually belongs in your pathetic little league. Julian, stop it, Chloe murmured, though she didn't pull away from his touch. She looked at me one last time. Goodbye, Leo. I hope you find someone who fits your world. They turned around. Chloe held her white gown up as she walked down the aisle, hand in hand with the man who had broken her heart a dozen times. They walked out of the church together, the heavy doors closing behind them with a loud, final bang. The entire chapel was dead silent. The guests stared at me with overwhelming pity. Sarah rushed up to the altar, her eyes filled with furious tears. She grabbed my arm tightly. Leo. Oh my God, Leo, I am so sorry. She is a monster. Let me call security, let me. No, Sarah, I said. My voice wasn't shaking. My heart wasn't breaking anymore. Instead, a deep, icy stillness settled inside my chest. Leo, please say something, Sarah pleaded, looking at my calm face with deep worry. You're freezing. Talk to me. I reached up and gently took off the white rose boutonniere pin to my tuxedo lapel. I dropped it onto the altar, right next to where we were supposed to sign our marriage certificate. I'm fine, Sarah, I said, a cold, quiet smile creeping onto the edges of my lips. You're fine? She asked, completely bewildered. She just humiliated you in front of everyone. She thinks she left an average man behind. I whispered, looking toward the closed church doors. She thinks she chose the billionaire. I looked at my sister, my eyes sharper than they had ever been in my 3 years of pretending to be ordinary. They have absolutely no idea who I actually am, I said softly. But they are about to find out. The heavy silence of my empty apartment pressed down on me like a physical weight. I sat on the edge of my worn-out leather sofa, staring blankly at the wall. My wedding suit was tossed onto a chair nearby, a stark reminder of the humiliation that had taken place only hours ago. The door opened, and Sarah walked in holding a paper bag from the local diner. She sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I bought you some hot coffee, Leo, she said, her voice soft and trembling. You haven't said a single word since we left the church. Please, just let out. Cry, scream, do something. I'm not going to cry, Sarah, I said, my voice surprisingly flat. She used you, Leo, Sarah cried, her anger finally bubbling over. She discarded 3 years of your love for a shiny trophy. It makes me sick. You didn't deserve this. I know, I muttered, staring at my hands. I gave her everything I thought a normal woman wanted. Peace, stability, genuine care. But it wasn't enough because my wallet didn't scream loud enough. Forget her, Sarah urged, squeezing my shoulder. You are worth so much more than her superficial standards. We'll get through this. We can move, start over, find you a quiet place. I am done hiding, Sarah, I said, looking up at her. The pain in my chest was gone, replaced by a freezing, calculated resolve. I spent 3 years pretending to be an ordinary analyst to find real love. It was a beautiful dream, but it is over. It is time to go home, Sarah gasped, her eyes widening in realization. You mean the penthouse? Apex Capital? Yes, I said, standing up. I walked over to the closet and pulled out a sleek, biometric black briefcase. The average guy named Leo died at that altar today. Call Arthur. Tell him to meet me at the penthouse in 30 minutes. Are you sure about this, Leo? Sarah asked, her voice hushed with a mixture of awe and fear. Once you step back into that world, there is no going back to a simple life. There is nothing left for me in a simple life, I replied coldly. 30 minutes later, the private elevator dinged as it opened directly into my glass-walled penthouse overlooking the glowing New York skyline. The city lights stretched out like a sea of diamonds. My senior legal counsel, Arthur Pendleton, was already waiting for me, standing beside a massive mahogany desk. He looked up, his expression a mix of deep respect and profound sorrow. Welcome back, Mr. Harrison, Arthur said, bowing his head slightly. I am deeply, deeply sorry for the events of this afternoon. It was an unacceptable insult. Skip the condolences, Arthur, I said, sitting behind the desk. I didn't bring you here to mourn. I brought you here to work. Arthur nodded, immediately opening a thick leather folder. Understand, sir. How would you like to proceed? Tell me about Julian Vance, I demanded, leaning back. Tell me about his crown jewel, Vance Enterprises. I want to know every single crack in his foundation. It is quite fascinating, actually, Arthur said, sliding a tablet across the desk. Julian presents himself as a financial genius to the media, but behind the curtain, he is incredibly reckless. To fund his massive European expansion, he took on astronomical loans. What kind of loans, Arthur? I asked, my eyes narrowing. Secret, offshore loans, sir, Arthur explained, pointing to the digital charts. He bypassed traditional U.S. banks to avoid public disclosure. He borrowed $800 million from a private consortium in Zurich. It is uncollateralized, but there is a brutal clause. If he defaults, the lender can seize 90% of his company's voting shares. And when is the payment due? I asked, a predatory smile forming on my lips. In exactly 2 weeks, Mr. Harrison, Arthur replied. And from our intelligence, his European projects are failing. He does not have the liquid capital to pay it back. He is desperately trying to secure refinancing, but the market is tight. Who is the current lead creditor of that Zurich consortium? I questioned. A shell company named Valo Holdings, Arthur said. They're currently holding his debt, but they're looking to sell it off to minimize their own risk. I tapped my fingers on the desk, looking out at the city. The trap was sitting right in front of me, open and waiting. Julian Vance thought he had won. He thought he had taken my woman and left me in the dust. He had no idea that the very ground he walked on was about to be bought out from under him. Arthur, I said quietly, the coldness in my voice echoing in the vast room. How much will it cost to buy Valo Holdings out of that debt package entirely? Arthur blinked in surprise, leaning forward. To buy the entire $800 million debt? It would require immediate liquidation of some of our short-term assets, sir. It is a massive move. We would become his sole creditor. Do we have the liquidity? I asked. Yes, Mr. Harrison. We can authorize the transfer within 24 hours. Arthur confirmed, his professional composure returning. But once you buy it, you hold all the cards. If he cannot pay you in 2 weeks, you will have the legal right to foreclose and take over Vance Enterprises entirely. Are you prepared to crush him so completely? He wanted to play with fire, Arthur. Let's make sure he burns. Buy his debt. All of it, I commanded. It will be done immediately, sir, Arthur said, a rare, knowing smile appearing on his face. I will draft the transfer agreements tonight. Julian Vance won't know what hit him. And Chloe? Sarah asked, stepping out from the shadows near the balcony. She had been listening in silence. What about her? She wanted a billionaire, Sarah, I said, staring at the glowing red logo of Vance Enterprises on a skyscraper in the distance. I'm just going to make sure she gets exactly what she signed up for. The bright lights of the Metropolitan Gala flashed in my eyes as I walked through the grand glass entryway. I wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, hand-spun from Italian silk, but to the untrained eye, it was just a nice jacket. Around me, the wealthiest people in the city laughed and drank expensive champagne, entirely unaware that my private firm, Apex Capital, pulled the strings of their beloved playground. I was scanning the room when I heard her voice. It was a laugh I used to know so well. Look at those lights, Julian, Chloe said, her voice filled with a breathless excitement. I never dreamed we would be sitting at the head table so soon. This is exactly where you belong, babe, Julian replied, his voice dripping with arrogance. With a man who can actually buy the room. I looked over. Chloe stood beside him, draped in a backless silver gown that probably cost more than my old yearly salary. Around her neck was a blinding diamond necklace, and she held her head high, wearing her new high society status like a shield. Julian spotted me. He froze for a second, a dark smirk slowly creeping onto his face as he tapped the shoulder of the older man standing next to him. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Julian said loudly, walking toward me. Marcus, you got to see this. The jilted groom actually made it past security. The older man, Marcus Stone, turned around with a look of mild amusement. Marcus was a legendary venture capitalist, notorious for his snobbish attitudes toward anyone outside his circle. Julian, who is this? Marcus asked, looking me up and down. Is he with the catering staff? No, Marcus. This is Leo, Julian chuckled, loud enough to draw the attention of several nearby investors. The guy who thought he could buy Chloe with a silver-plated ring. Tell me, Leo, did you spend your entire life savings on a fake ticket just to watch us win? Chloe walked up behind them, her proud smile faltering when she saw me. She looked uncomfortable, glancing around at the whispering crowd. Leo, what are you doing here? She whispered, her voice laced with deep pity. You shouldn't be in a place like this. It is embarrassing for you. I'm just enjoying the evening, Chloe, I said, my voice perfectly calm and level. It is a public event. No, it is an elite event, Julian corrected sharply, stepping right into my personal space. Guys like you don't belong here. You handle small-time accounts for middle-class families. If I say the word, I can have Marcus and every other major player here blacklist you from every financial house in New York. Indeed, Marcus chimed in, swirling his glass. A word from Julian or myself can make a man like you disappear from the financial sector overnight, young man. Settle down, or leave before you ruin what is left of your career. Leo, please just go, Chloe urged, stepping forward and looking at me with pleading eyes. Julian is serious. He has the power to destroy you. You can't compete with him. His world is just too big for you to understand, and I don't want to see you get hurt. I appreciate your concern, Chloe, I said, a faint, chilling smile playing on my lips. But I think my career will survive the night. You really are an arrogant little loser, aren't you? Julian laughed, crossing his arms. My company is launching a massive European expansion next week. We are about to finalize an $800 million deal. While I am building an empire, you will still be sitting in your tiny office, counting other people's pennies. An $800 million expansion, I repeated, tilting my head slightly. That sounds incredibly expensive, Julian. Are you absolutely certain your funding is secure? My funding is backed by the largest offshore consortium in Zurich. You idiot, Julian snapped, leaning in closer. They have deeper pockets than you could ever dream of. Of course, I said smoothly, but even the deepest pockets can have holes in them. And sometimes the strings of those pockets are held by people you never see. Marcus Stone frowned, his amusement fading. What is that supposed to mean, kid? Nothing at all, Mr. Stone, I replied, taking a slow sip of my water. Just a bit of financial advice. In my line of work, we learn that the most dangerous traps are the ones you build yourself. You're pathetic, Julian scoffed, turning back to Chloe. Come on, babe. Let's not waste our time on a guy who will be begging for a job at my firm next month. Chloe looked at me one last time, shaking her head. I really thought you were smarter than this, Leo. You're just making yourself look small. Enjoy the view from the top, Julian, I said quietly, making sure my voice carried clearly over the murmurs of the crowd. The higher you climb, the harder the pavement feels. Julian paused, throwing a glaring look over his shoulder. Keep dreaming, loser. I watched them walk away, Julian laughing loudly as he introduced Chloe to another group of wealthy elites. She smiled proudly, leaning into his side, completely oblivious. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text from Arthur. The Zurich transfer is complete. Valo Holdings has formally signed over the debt. You are now the sole creditor of Vance Enterprises. We are preparing to freeze his corporate credit lines on your mark. I typed a single word in reply. Freeze. I locked my phone and placed it back in my pocket. Julian Vance thought he had just humiliated me, but he had no idea that the very crown he wore was already sitting on my desk. What do you mean the wire transfer was rejected? Julian's voice roared through the double doors of his office. I stood quietly in the corridor of the executive floor, holding a folder of lease agreements. No one noticed me. Through the glass walls, I could see Julian pacing wildly. His expensive tie was undone, and his hair was a messy ruin. Chloe stood by the window, her face pale. Julian, please. The staff can hear you. Just calm down and call the bank manager back. Calm down, Julian screamed, turning on her with a wild look in his eyes. The offshore accounts are frozen, Chloe. Every single one of them. The Swiss consortium isn't answering my calls, and now my local credit lines are showing a red flag. The phone on his desk buzzed loudly. Julian snatched it up, pressing it to his ear. Marcus! Thank God. Did you talk to the board? Is the backup funding ready? I couldn't hear Marcus Stone's exact words, but Julian's face instantly drained of all color. What do you mean you're pulling out? Julian stammered, his hands shaking. Marcus, we have a contract. You promised 30% of the liquidity. The contract has a material change clause. Julian. Marcus's voice leaked faintly through the speaker. My analysts say your debt has been bought out by an aggressive third party. You're a toxic asset now. I am out, and so is my firm. The line went dead with a sharp click. Julian stared at the phone. Slowly, he raised his arm and threw the handset directly at the glass wall. It shattered into plastic pieces, right in front of Chloe. She jumped back, letting out a sharp scream. Julian, are you crazy? Chloe cried, clutching her chest. You almost hit me. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with me? Julian yelled, stepping closer to her, his finger pointed aggressively at her face. You're what is wrong with me? Ever since I brought you back into my life, everything has gone to hell. The wedding crash, the media backlash, and now this. You brought this bad luck into my house. How can you say that? Chloe's voice cracked as tears filled her eyes. I left my wedding for you. I chose you. I left a good man who loved me because you told me we were going to build an empire together. A good man. Julian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that made him look completely unhinged. You mean that pathetic loser, Leo? You think he could have saved this? If I lose this company, Chloe, we have nothing. Do you understand? Nothing. The house, the cars, the jewelry. It's all tied to the corporate debt. We will be on the street. No, that can't be true, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at her sparkling diamond ring. You are a billionaire, Julian. You told me you had endless cash. You said we were going to buy an estate in France. I lied. Julian roared, slamming his hands onto the mahogany desk. I needed the reputation to secure the Swiss loans. And now some anonymous fund named Apex Capital bought the papers, and they are demanding the full $800 million by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, Chloe. $800 million. Chloe gasped, her knees visibly shaking. She sank slowly onto the leather sofa, her proud posture completely gone. But who is Apex Capital? Why would they do this to you? I don't know, Julian yelled, pulling at his hair in absolute panic. They won't take my calls. Their legal team just sent a formal foreclosure notice. If we don't pay by 9 o'clock tomorrow, they take 90% of my voting shares. I will be fired from my own company. Can't you sell some land? Chloe pleaded, her tears running down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. Or your cars. We have to do something. Sell what? Julian sneered, glaring at her with pure disgust. Everything is leveraged to the hilt. The bank already sent a repossession notice for the yacht this morning. I am ruined, Chloe, and you're sitting here whining about a French estate. Chloe stared at him, her eyes wide with a paralyzing fear. I watched her expression shift. The smug, confident woman who had walked out of my wedding was gone. In her place was a terrified girl realizing she had traded a real, safe life for a hollow, burning cage. Julian, she whispered, her voice filled with a deep, creeping regret. We made a mistake. I shouldn't have. Shut up. Julian snapped, pointing at the door. Get out of my office. I need to find a way to reach the head of Apex Capital. I need to beg them for an extension, and I don't need you crying in my ear. Chloe stood up slowly, her body trembling. She looked at Julian as if he were a complete stranger. You are a monster, she whispered softly. I'm a businessman who is about to lose everything. Julian shouted back. Now get out. Chloe turned and rushed toward the door, wiping her eyes. As she opened it, she ran straight into me. I caught her by the shoulders to steady her. Leo, she gasped, her tear-stained eyes widening in absolute shock. What are you doing here on the corporate floor? Just delivering some papers, Chloe. I said, my voice perfectly smooth, showing no emotion at all. Leo, you have to leave, she whispered frantically, looking back at Julian's closed door. Julian is having a crisis. He is completely out of his mind. It isn't safe for you here. Is that so? I asked, looking down at her trembling hands. It seems the billionaire life isn't as peaceful as you hoped. I don't know what to do, Chloe sobbed, looking at me with a desperate, familiar look I had seen many times before. Everything is falling apart, Leo. I told you, Chloe, I said quietly, stepping past her. The higher you climb, the harder the pavement feels. Tomorrow morning, the ground is coming. The atmosphere inside the main boardroom of Vance Enterprises was suffocating. I could see the sweat on the foreheads of the 12 board members. They sat in absolute silence around the massive glass table. At the far end, Julian sat slumped in his executive leather chair, staring blankly at the polished floor. Beside him sat Chloe, her fingers desperately twisting her engagement ring. The clock on the wall read exactly 8:59 a.m. He's running late, Julian muttered, his voice hoarse. Maybe they're willing to negotiate. They have to. Julian, please, one of the board members sighed, wiping his face with a handkerchief. We owe them $800 million. They bought our debt. There is no negotiating. If they don't walk through that door with an extension, we are completely wiped out. Shut up, Julian snapped, though the fire in his voice was entirely gone. I built this empire. They can't just take it. Chloe looked at him with hollow eyes. Julian, you said you had a backup plan. You promised me. I said, shut up, Chloe, he growled. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. I stepped through the doorway, wearing a custom-tailored black three-piece suit. Arthur Pendleton walked smoothly in my right hand, holding a thick leather folder, while two burly security guards in dark glasses followed close behind us. Chloe's jaw dropped. She gasped loudly, her hand instantly flying to her chest as her face turned completely white. Leo, she stammered, her voice shaking so hard it was barely audible. She gripped the edge of her chair as if she might fall. What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like that? Julian slowly raised his head, his bloodshot eyes widening in absolute confusion. You? Is this some kind of sick joke? Who let this trash into my boardroom? Security, get this pathetic loser out of here right now. Our security guards did not move. Instead, they stepped to the side, blocking the exit. I'm afraid those guards won't help you, Mr. Vance, Arthur said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He stepped forward, placing his leather folder on the glass table. Allow me to introduce my employer. This is Mr. Leo Harrison. He is the founder, CEO, and majority shareholder of Apex Capital. He is also, as of 5 o'clock yesterday, the sole owner of your debt. No, Julian screamed, slamming his fists onto the table as he stood up. No, that is impossible. Leo is an average nobody. He works a desk job. He doesn't have $800 million. This is a scam. Chloe, tell them who he is. Chloe was staring at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror, confusion, and a sudden, sickening realization. Leo, she whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. You're Apex Capital? The multi-billion-dollar fund? The ones who bought the debt? Yes, Chloe, I said, my voice cold, calm, and perfectly clear. I am. But why? She cried, her voice cracking with pure panic. Why would you hide this from me? We were going to get married. I loved you. You loved my simple life, Chloe, I replied, walking slowly down the length of the table. Until a flashy billionaire came along. You wanted to marry a man who owned the world. Well, you're looking at him. This is a lie. Julian roared, his face turning red as he pointed a shaking finger at me. I don't care how much money you have, Leo. You can't just walk in here and take my father's company. I will sue you. I will take you to court. With what money, Julian? Arthur asked quietly, sliding a document from the folder. Your corporate and personal assets are completely frozen. You have no liquidity to pay your lawyers, let alone fight a legal battle against Apex Capital. Julian looked at the paper. His legs seemed to lose all strength, and he collapsed back into his chair, staring at the ceiling. The arrogant man who had humiliated me at the altar was completely gone. He looked like a shattered shell. I stood directly over Julian, looking down at his defeated face. "Get out of my executive chair," I said softly and coldly. Julian didn't move. He just stared at me, his eyes blank with defeat. One of our security guards stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Julian's shoulder. Slowly, Julian stood up, trembling, and took a step away from the head of the table. I slowly pulled the large leather chair out and sat down. The glass table stretched out before me, filled with shattered board members who suddenly wouldn't dare meet my gaze. Chloe took a trembling step toward me, her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "Leo, please. We can talk about this." I was confused. Julian lied to me about everything. I didn't know he was in debt. "Please, you have to believe me. We can start over. I will leave him right now." I looked up at her. The face I had loved for 3 years now looked entirely foreign to me. I felt no anger, no sadness, and no desire to hold her. I felt only an icy indifference. "You call me a nobody, Julian," I said, my eyes drifting from Chloe to the broken man standing beside her. "But today, I am the nobody who owns everything you ever cared about." I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out a sleek black fountain pen, and slid a thick document across the glass table. It stopped right in front of Julian's shaking hands. "What is this?" Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "These are indeed your official termination papers," I said, my voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "As of this moment, you are stripped of your title as CEO. You have no voting rights, no access to the building, and no share in this company's future. Leave this place immediately." "Please, Julian, just sign it." Arthur's voice was cold as he tapped the desk. "It is over." With trembling hands, Julian grabbed my black pen and scribbled his signature on the bottom line. He dropped the pen, looking completely broken. The security guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing him firmly by the arms to guide him out of the room. He didn't fight them. He just dragged his feet, his head hanging low as they pulled him toward the exit. Chloe let out a desperate sob, watching him go. She looked back at me, her eyes red, her expensive mascara smudged all over her cheeks. She didn't follow him. Instead, she rushed toward the head of the table, cornering me before I could step out of the boardroom. "Leo, please wait," she cried, reaching out to grab my sleeve. I stepped back smoothly, avoiding her touch without saying a single word. "Do not touch me, Chloe." "Leo, please, you have to listen to me," she wept, clasping her hands together. "I was manipulated. Julian threatened me. He told me he would ruin your career if I didn't leave with him at the altar. I only did it to protect you. You have to believe me." "To protect me?" I asked, a bitter, quiet laugh escaping my lips. "Is that why you were laughing in his arms at the French restaurant? Is that why you paraded around the Metropolitan Gala in a silver dress, telling me I didn't belong in his world?" "I was acting," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. "I had to make him believe I loved him. I didn't know he was completely broke. I didn't know he was a fraud. Deep down, I always loved you, Leo. I loved our quiet life. We can still have that. We can leave this city today. We can still get married." "You are lying to yourself, Chloe," I said, looking down at her with absolute indifference. The anger that had burned inside me for 2 weeks was completely gone. In its place, there was only a cold, empty pity. "You didn't care about my safety. You cared about his billions. You thought you were trading up, but you just bought a ticket on a sinking ship." "No, that's not true," she sobbed, dropping to her knees on the plush carpet, grabbing the hem of my trousers. "Please, Leo, I made a mistake. I was confused. Everyone makes mistakes. You are a good man. You can't be this cruel to me." I looked down at her, gently pulling my leg away from her weak grip. "You didn't make a mistake, Chloe. You made a choice. Now you get to live with it," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "Leo," she shrieked, her voice echoing down the hallway. "You can't do this to me. I have nothing left." "You have Julian," I replied coldly. "Go build your empire with him. Security, escort Miss Miller out of the building." 2 guards stepped in, gently but firmly lifting Chloe from the floor. She screamed my name, crying and thrashing, but they dragged her down the corridor, her high heels scraping loudly against the polished marble until the elevator doors finally closed, cutting off her voice forever. The silence that followed was beautiful. I walked out of the boardroom and entered my new executive suite. It was a massive corner office with floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the entire city of New York. The sun was shining brightly now, casting long, warm golden rays across the polished darkwood floor. The double doors of the office opened softly, and Sarah walked in. She wasn't wearing her bridesmaid dress anymore. She wore a sharp, professional blazer. She walked over to the desk, a bright, proud smile on her face. "The branding team just called Leo," Sarah said, her voice filled with excitement. "The workers are already taking the Vance Enterprises sign down from the front of the building. By tomorrow morning, the new sign will be up." "What does it say?" I asked, turning to look at her. "Apex Tower," Sarah smiled, walking over to stand beside me at the window. "It suits you much better. How do you feel?" "I feel light, Sarah," I said, looking out at the endless skyline. For 3 years, I tried to hide who I was because I wanted to be normal. I thought being Leo the analyst would bring me happiness, but I was just hiding from my own power. "You don't have to hide anymore," Sarah whispered, placing a supportive hand on my arm. "You built this. You earned this. And now, the world knows exactly who you are." "Yes," I agreed, a genuine, peaceful smile finally spreading across my face. "They do. So what is our first move as the new owners of this tower?" Sarah asked, her eyes sparkling with ambition. "Call Arthur," I instructed, my voice filled with a new, powerful energy. "Tell him to prepare the acquisition files for Marcus Stone's firm. He wanted to blacklist me from this city. I think it is time we show him who really controls the list." "Consider it done," Sarah laughed, turning on her heel and heading toward the door. "Welcome back, big brother." As she walked out, I took a deep breath, resting my hand against the cool glass of the window. The city below looked so small from up here, but my world had never felt larger. I had lost a fiancé at the altar, but I had gained my empire back. I had gotten my justice, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my true self. I turned back to my desk, sat down in the large executive chair, and opened the first folder of the day. The shadows of my past were gone. My new empire had finally risen from the ashes.